On the heels of the Spanish-American War, the United States had gained access to Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and also the Philippines. U.S. imperialists saw the Philippines as a gateway to the rest of Asia, particularly to China. China was seen as a vast potential market for American products. It also presented American investors with brand new opportunities for large-scale railroad construction and all sorts of other things. Really quickly, this is going to lead us towards something called the open door notes. We'll come back to this political cartoon at the end after you have enough information to really analyze it. But you can do some basic analysis right here. And a tiny bit of background, some of the reasons we'd want inroads into China, a large population, a large and growing population. Today it remains the largest population of the world, although in your lifetime it'll be overtaken by India because of its single-child policy in the last 2 decades, which has been lifted, I believe. China had a vast market for growing and exporting tea. The British thought it was extremely important. One of the reasons that there's tea time in Great Britain has to do with British imperialism in China, ahead of the United States imperialism in China. Eventually, the British tap into the Chinese market and begin selling opium. This is an opium den to the Chinese, create addicts out of the Chinese, and create markets for a product that they're going to sell to the Chinese. And even though the Chinese forcibly make it illegal for those opium dens to operate inside of China, the British forced their way in. Just to be fair, historically speaking, there were all sorts of legal uses for those opiate types of products, even in our own U.S. history. You can see cough syrups and salves for babies' gums, you know. Nothing like soothing a teething baby like rubbing a little heroin on their gums, yes. So the empress at the time tried to rid China of opium, but did not have luck. And so the Chinese have been weakened by all sorts of interventions in the past. They're known as the sick man of Asia in part because they've been had other people's will forced upon them for a while. So today we're going to talk about rebellion against that. The United States comes late to the game, but the Chinese are accustomed to rebelling against foreign powers, and this is a boxer. We'll talk about boxers today and the rebellion that will ensue as a result of yet another attempt to imperialize the country of China. Okay.
Gain control of the Philippines. As a result of the Spanish-American War, many saw the possession of the islands as a gateway to large markets in mainland Asia. American products could be sold there, and many capitalists envisioned a new and untapped market for investors in large-scale railroad construction. At the dawn of the 20th century, American factories were producing more goods than the country could consume, and the continued growth of the American economy depended on exports to foreign markets. China had been weakened by war and enormous amounts of foreign intervention. Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan all had established settlements along China's coast. These nations also managed sizable spheres of influence where each country maintained strict economic control. The U.S. government and American investors began to fear a future in which China would be carved into European colonies that were closed to American products and companies. With American interest in mind.
So as both he spoke about and I gave you the intro before, China was significantly weakened by war and other types of foreign intervention prior to the United States getting there. But the United States is now interested in China for the same reasons that France, Germany, Britain, Japan, and Russia already were. So we see the United States sees China as a potential market, has natural resources, but also a consumer market for our goods. The problem is that we're late to the game, and so France, Britain, Japan, Russia have something called spheres of influence that are already they've already got these established spots inside of China, primarily along the coastline, where they've carved out their own little deals. You can see the British have this area of Shanghai and Hong Kong. The Hong Kong is going to remain under British control for a very, very long time, I think until like 1999. Anyway, you can glance at this map and see that other countries have spheres of influence. The United States is late to the game and doesn't have but these little tiny kind of inroads in. So we're interested in seeing what we can do to force our way into this market. Along comes a guy named John Hay. He's the Secretary of State at the time. And he does something kind of interesting. So the United States began to fear that China would be carved into colonies and American traders would never be able to get their foot in the door. So to protect American interests, the United States Secretary of State, John Hay, you see to the right, issued in 1899 a series of policy statements called open door notes. They kind of amount to free trade agreements that you hear talked about today, like NAFTA and CAFTA and the USMCA. I believe that's what the new NAFTA is called. So these open door notes are a series of letters that are addressed to the leaders of the other imperialist nations, and it's proposing that the nations just share trading rights with the United States, and that in effect, by all sharing equal access to the potential Chinese market, that everybody would gain from it. This political cartoon is obviously about those open door notes. You can see that Uncle Sam stands in front of an open door. And in the background, you see China. And outside of the door, with the United States kind of blocking the way, you see these other imperialist nations appearing in. The key says American diplomacy, so these are negotiated kind of trade policies, and Uncle Sam holds the key to the door, in theory. Okay, so in general, the open door notes were meant to be this policy where no single nation would have a monopoly on trade with any other part of China, and the other imperialist powers reluctantly kind of accepted this policy. In effect, what happened historically is kind of something interesting. People just didn't write back. It was kind of ridiculous. And then the United States just acted as if they were okay with it. And then events unfolded that will kind of change the course of force the United States to be allowed into China. And anyway, let's talk about what happens that creates that situation. So once the United States kind of edges its way in, the people of China rebel. Not all of the people of China, but many people in China are going to rebel and form these rebellious groups to try to rid their nation of foreigners. These rebellions are not just aimed at the United States, but they're aimed at all of those imperialist powers that are there. For the most part, that coastline has been dominated by European powers, and the big Chinese coastal cities where money can truly be made in trade are controlled not by the Chinese, but by other people. And so a variety of different rebellious groups are formed, one of which is called the Boxers. They're a secret society, and they're more formally called the Fists of Righteous Harmony, but nicknamed the Boxers because they practiced martial arts. So resentment simmers beneath the surface. Some Chinese formed secret societies pledged to rid the country of foreign devils, and the most famous of these is a secret group called the Boxers. The Boxers not only practiced martial arts, but they believed themselves to be bulletproof, impervious to foreign bullets. They also believed that if they did everything right, that their ancestral spirits were supposed to come and protect them, so that they would be fighting not just with the people that they had on Earth, but with these kind of ancestral spirits to guide them. So think about Mulan and in the movie when they're kind of when the dragon's kind of calling upon the ancestral spirits to come and help guide. That's the whole idea. So the Boxers killed hundreds of missionaries and other foreigners, as well as Chinese converts to Christianity. In August of 1900, an organized group of troops from Britain and France and Germany and Japan and the United States joined together. There were just roughly about 2,500 American soldiers that fought in this conflict, but it was a combined force of all of these imperialist nations. They worked together to put down the rebellion. Within about 2 months, the international forces put down the Boxer Rebellion, and thousands of Chinese people are going to die during this process, in part because the Boxers, of course, were not impervious to foreign bullets and died in massive numbers.
Hay issued a series of policy statements that became known as the Open Door Notes. These were letters addressed to the leaders of European powers, suggesting that nations share trading rights in China. This would create what Hay referred to as an open door. It would be in the best interest of all, he argued, if no one country held a monopoly on trade in any part of China. As foreign intervention in China continued to grow, so did the resentment of many Chinese. Although China had managed to maintain its independence, large sections of major cities were completely under foreign control. Resentment of foreigners continued to swell amongst the Chinese, and secret societies began to form, pledging to rid their country of what they referred to as foreign devils. The most famous of these groups would give the coming Chinese rebellion its name. This group became known as the Boxers because many of its members practiced martial arts. The Boxer Rebellion began with an attempt to expel all foreigners from China. The Boxers surrounded the European section of Beijing and kept the area under siege for several months. Hundreds of missionaries and other foreigners were killed, along with any Chinese who had converted to Christianity. Seeing American interests threatened in the area, the U.S. government prepared to respond. In August of 1900, the U.S. sent 2,500 soldiers to China to protect American citizens and interests there.
Protecting American rights. After the Boxer Rebellion, the United States feared that European nations would use their victory to take an even greater control of China. And to prevent this, John Hay issued a second series of open door notes announcing that the United States would safeguard for the world the principles of equal and impartial trade with all ports of the Chinese Empire. This policy paved the way for greater American influence in Asia. The open door policy reflected three deeply held American beliefs about the United States' industrial capitalist economy. First of all, Americans believed that the growth of the United States economy depended upon exports. Second, they felt the United States had the right to intervene abroad to keep foreign markets open because it was in their economy's best interest. Third, they feared that closing an area to American products, citizens, or ideas threatened U.S. survival. These beliefs became the bedrock for American foreign policy. Very important stuff right here. Very important stuff right here.
The soldiers fought alongside troops from Britain, France, Germany, and Japan to put down the rebellion. Within 2 months, the Boxer Rebellion was squelched. Thousands of Chinese died as a result of the fighting. After the conflict ended, John Hay issued a second series of open door notes, stating that the United States would safeguard the principle of open trade for all nations in the Chinese Empire. This action established the United States as a major player in the post-Boxer Rebellion China, as well as on the global stage.
Okay. Quick review of U.S. imperialism between 1867 and early 1900s. So we talked early on about some of the first examples in the 1860s being the acquisition of Alaska. And in the 1850s and 60s, there are already people looking at places like Hawaii and the Midway Islands who are already active in those places, although we haven't officially taken them until later. In the 1870s and 80s, we see the conflict that we've already discussed in Hawaii happening. The Berlin Conference is going to be happening in Africa. The 1890s, when the Spanish-American War gets fought, we end up with these strategically located ports that end us near the Philippines, and also Puerto Rico, which strategically is located near the Panama Canal Zone. And then finally, we will have access to the Canal Zone and China. And we'll head here next. Thank you.